Like, share, subscribe, click the notification bell, and on with the video. Alright, so this is SHTF Garden coming to you, talking about the price increases ahead, what's baked into the cake already, and 2023 hasn't even started yet. Let's take a quick look. Alright, so we got inflation on the rise again, so it's just now starting to come down a little bit, the inflation numbers, at least according to CPI, for what that's worth, and that inflation is about to get ramped back up again. We're coming down off of some of that COVID spending. Numbers started coming back down. It was up to around 8.9%, and then it dropped down to like say 7.4, somewhere in that neighborhood. Well, it's about to go back up again. So I just wanted to throw this out there that, as I'm sure everybody knows, when you increase the amount of money, you increase the amount of inflation. They can try and change definitions all they want. You can't get away from a economic certainty. You increase money spending, you increase federal creation of dollars, you get more inflation. All right, this chart just kind of goes to drive home that point. Chart I found, it was showing the relationships between the CPI over the long term and the bond market. So they create money in the form of bonds, and the CPI goes up, and this kind of tracks. And that's the point of this. All right, so let's take a look at some of the stuff that's going on with why I say that inflation is going to be going back up. Nobody's talking about that yet, but they will be soon. So we had the $1.7 trillion bill funding government operations for the remainder of fiscal year 2023. Includes $800 billion in domestic spending and 9.3% increase over fiscal year 2022. Now, we had tons of inflation in fiscal year 2022. Now we're going to spend what we spent last year and 9.3% ahead of that. Also includes $858 billion in military spending, which is a 10% increase. Hopefully the troops got some raises out of that. So overall, the omnibus bill authorized about $1.57 trillion more than last year's budget. More than last year's budget. So up until 2009, we never had a $1 trillion deficit year. That's the first year ever. Whenever Obama signed and yes, if I get hater comments in the comment section, go look it up. Obama did sign the 2009 budget. There was a continuing resolution before that Bush signed. Anyways, aside from the history lesson, so let's keep going. All right. So, of course, it's not the only component of federal expenditures. Congress approved a $1.9 trillion spending to address the pandemic earlier this year. Called the Inflation Reduction Act, which should be more like the Cause Inflation Act. So we still have this $1.9 trillion being spent now. That has not made its way fully into the market yet. Now we got another $1.5 trillion on top of last year's budget. So now we're up, with a lot of spending going on. And that's just, we haven't even started the year yet. Imagine what it's going to be like by the end. I mean, you're talking $3.4 trillion so far. I mean, I don't even know what to say. That's going to be more than that when you look at the actual budget. So anyway, let's keep going. So we got a big problem when it comes to inflation. And it's a big problem when it comes to the Federal Reserve, because now the Federal Reserve is in a pickle. So if you want to try and combat inflation, the way to do it is to raise interest rates. Raising interest rates will help pull some of that money out of the market, because people's going to start putting money in the savings account. Right now, with a low interest rate, there's no incentive for you to save your money. You put money in the savings account, as high as the rate of inflation is, you're losing value. So in order to prevent that and incentivize people to buying something at the store with their money that is a hard asset, they're trying to get people to put it in the bank, which will pull it out of circulation to some extent. It'll still exist, but it won't be out there being, buying goods. So you get that incentive by raising the interest rate. But whenever you raise the interest rate, you also raise the interest rate on the debt the Fed has to pay. So that becomes the pickle. See, back in the 80s, they were able to do this to stop the massive inflation that was left over from the 70s, because we weren't in such an enormous amount of debt like we are now. So now we'll get to that in a second. All right, so let's look at what it is now. The Federal Reserve has primarily relied on interest rate, battle inflation. Can't slay the inflation drag of monetary policy alone. Why can't you do it? Because in order for this strategy to work, you have to stop putting the money into the system beyond what you need. So you can't put extra money in the system, because then you need extra interest rates, and you end up with some kind of spiral going on down the toilets where that spiral goes. So anyways, so you end up with a situation where you need to be able to stop the spending, excessive spending, don't create any more money, and then pull some of the money back with high interest rates to control the inflation. So you have to turn off the print spigots for this to work. But if they turn off the print spigots, then our economy is kind of based on that right now, isn't it? Are we just printing and printing and printing money we don't have to spend on pet projects? Imagine the austerity measures we'd end up having to put in place to be able to do that, which, ultimately have to be done. Anyways, so I digress. So the fact that, let's just skip down with some of this. U.S. federal fiscal policy contributes to inflation by making it possible for the Fed to do its job, because of what I just mentioned. The trend of inflation being fully controlled by monetary authority when public debt can be successfully stabilized. So here we go again. Let's look at some of these numbers here. So you got the Fed pays for the bonds with money it creates out of thin air, which creates by definition inflation. So how is it going to finance these massive debts? They're predicting, this is a Zero Hedge article, they're predicting they're going to have to stop doing the rising interest rates and maybe go back to more bond buying with quantitative easing. Right now they're on QT, which is quantitative tightening. They need to go. They're just predicting they're going to go back to quantitative easing. We'll see if that actually happens or not. And why would they want to do that? Because fiscal year 2022, Treasury forked out $475 billion just to fund the government's interest payments. Okay, so now you're talking about 1.9 trillion, 1.5 trillion is supposed to be 1.7, I think it was, but ended up being in the final numbers. But they're saying 1.5 over last year. Let's go with that number. Either way, it was 1.5, 1.7, 1.9. You got all these massive dollar amounts out there that's not being counted into this right here. So this $475 billion interest payments don't count the new money that's being printed out right now to pay for this boondoggle that just got passed. Can't believe they did this. All right, so that's up 30% in 1 year. 30% in 1 year from 2021 to 2022. So that's a disaster. If your home budget was like that and you all of a sudden had 30% more bills when it comes to interest payments on your credit cards, a car, a house, or whatever, it would be impossible, maybe possibly to pay for it. Or you'd have to make major cuts in other parts of your life to afford that. So that is almost as much money in interest payments as they're paying for Medicare. So if you're on Medicare or you're on Medicaid or something like that, and you're looking at what the government's doing with this money, you should be outraged, because they're going to be cutting you eventually. In fact, Medicaid's supposed to be cut, I think, in April, according to this omnibus bill. The states are going to have the option, I believe it's to start opting out of the expanded Medicaid from the COVID relief, so I believe it's starting in April. So when that happens, remember that they're doing all this spending in other countries, and they're doing all this other stuff with your money instead of helping out American people that need it. So anyways, $250 billion below Medicare. According to the Congressional Budget Office, interest payments are about to balloon. No kidding. All right, projects interest payments will be triple from nearly $400 billion fiscal year 2022 to $1.2 trillion by 2032. And of course, they're saying that they made this estimate in May. So worse than that, they made it in May. Interest rates are already higher than those used in its analysis. So they're talking about 2032 being 1.2 trillion. It looks like it's going to be hard to have, because that's what May's numbers. May's numbers did not have this $1.7 trillion bill they just passed. I don't believe they had an Inflation Reduction Act passed back then either. So you're talking tons of extra money and the lower interest rates. So they're going to, at some point in time, something's going to have to give. They're going to have to lower interest rates, but then if you do, you're going to end up with increased inflation. So it's looking like increased inflation as far as the eye can see for the moment, unless something big changes. So let's move on past that. I think we've established that. Let's look at some other reasons why prices are going up. There is the conflict, and it would be nice if the conflict stopped and we could start getting world markets back open again with grains and oil and all that stuff. But that's not going to happen. They want to have a peace summit, but the condition that they're putting out there is that they must have a tribunal. So, do you think that this place here, this big R, is going to say yes, take me to trial to have a peace agreement? Absolutely not. I don't believe that's going to happen. So it looks like they're not serious about wanting that. They're not serious about wanting that. At this point in time, they just hate each other and they're just going to keep fighting. So don't expect that situation to get any better. All right, so because of the energy crisis going on in Europe and the European Union, they basically went to the big R and said, hey, we're not going to allow you to sell your oil above $60 a barrel because we want cheap oil. And so they use sanctioning leverage to say, okay, we won't allow companies to insure your vessels that are carrying oil. So I don't know why they thought that would work. So they just, Big R just banned exporting oil to those countries. So they really are in a pickle when it comes to that because they had the pipe go the way of the dodo, and so now there's not a whole lot of energy coming in. That just cut another source of it. So let's take a look at what other stuff is in this $1.7 trillion package. So you got this Inflation Reduction Act. What did you get out of that? So you got some tax hikes that are also going to increase the cost of things. You got a $6.5 billion natural gas tax. Okay, well, home heating, I don't know about your house, but home heating costs and electricity costs have gone way up at my house. So, yeah, that's going to make that even worse. And I'm going to have a link for the Congressional Budget Office up here in the top corner on one of these slides. So that's according to the CBO, and the CBO, you know, they're never accurate. So if they say 6.5 billion, it'll probably be 10 billion. All right, so the letter from Congress from the American Gas Association warned methane tax would amount to a 17% increase on the average family's natural gas bill. Now, of course, that's as of right now. Who knows what could change in the future? But you're looking at, according to the American Gas Association, a 17% increase in gas. Now, natural gas. A lot of homes are heated in this cold winter with natural gas. So that's going to be an increase there for sure. But there's also a lot of electricity that's being produced with natural gas. And then when you think about grains and grain production, because it's not like they're going to repeal this tax. A lot of rice dryers and corn dryers and things of that nature are also being run off either natural gas or propane. So keep that in mind. 17% increase on that. What's another tax? We got $12 billion crude oil tax, which will increase household costs here again. 16.4 cents per barrel tax on crude oil and imported petroleum products be passed on to consumers in the form of higher gas prices. Now, gas prices, let's talk about that for a second. Gas prices are going to go up again. They were really high, and it was causing a political problem for the party in power. So they began dumping out oil from the Strategic Oil Reserve to put more supply on the market, law supply and demand, so that's going to lower prices. Boom, prices start falling. They fell in time for the midterms, but now the midterms are over. There is zero incentive to keep prices down. So you can't empty the Strategic Petroleum Reserve forever. So now that's come to a stop. So they're going to be cutting that off, and that's a million barrels per day that's no longer going to be put out onto the market. So the oil we do have is going to be hit with an extra tax. That bill just got passed, and so now you have I'm not exactly sure when this tax takes place, but I imagine it's probably going to be in January, so it's going to be coming down the pipe here real soon. Alright, so what else do we have going on? $1.2 billion coal tax. A lot of electric plants, much as they don't want to admit it, a lot of electric generation still comes from coal. And if you're on the coal producing areas of, like, say, West Virginia, then that's going to impact your economy as well. And of course, this isn't related to these cost increase, but they're also playing around with 401ks, if y'all haven't heard about that. So what's going on with this? Let's see what else. Oh yeah, here's the CBO link I mentioned. So there's the CBO, cbo.gov/publication/58357 if you want to see a summary of what the CBO has said about this bill. All right, so you got $225 billion corporate income tax hike, which will be passed on to households. Of course, it's going to be passed on. Let me tell you, there's a lot of people, and there's some merit to the argument. Say, well, these corporations shouldn't be paying so little or nothing in taxes. They shouldn't be able to do that. There's other ways. I think the tax code could be fixed up, but I'm not a tax expert, so. All I know is that taxes are looked at as a business expense. So if you tax something, they're not going to just eat that cost. They are going to either mitigate that cost with less employees or higher prices every single time. You could raise the corporate tax rate to 99%, and the corporations will never pay the tax. They just don't pay taxes. Doesn't matter what you set the rate to. You, the consumer, pay the taxes. If you put a 50% price, or if you put a 50% tax on Walmart, that means to make up, they're not going to suck up one single penny of that. They will not pay one penny of that. Who will pay that will be all the customers who see their prices jump up and all the employees who lose their jobs. So that's how corporations pay taxes. They find other ways to pass it off. And so you can raise it as much as you want. All you're doing is hurting everyone else. Maybe it's not fair, but that's just reality. That's just reality. So anyways, this right here is going to impact anybody who shops at a store or anything like that. There is a market cap, so you have to be... it has to be some large companies it's going to have to do this 15% minimum tax, alternative minimum tax. So you're talking, here again, industry like that is energy, like Exxon is going to have to pay this, or Walmart's going to have to pay this, like really big businesses. And really big businesses are going to really pass on those costs to you. Unless you plan on not buying gas anymore and not going to Walmart anymore. I don't think that's going to be the case. All right, so back to Strategic Petroleum Reserve. All right, so here it is. This was on 12/16. All right, so they're going to begin filling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve up, which tells you two things when it comes to price increases. One, they're not going to be draining it anymore. And two, instead of just stopping and having that 1 million barrels per day not on the market, they're going to start buying off the market to refill it. So we're going to end up having to pay the price of having lower gas prices for 6 months. So we got away with having to have some lower prices artificially lowered instead of lowered through the proper means of naturally increasing our production, which would have been the way you should do it. Instead, we artificially lowered them, and now we're going to have to pay the price because now they're going to be artificially higher. Because now that same amount of oil that was put out in the market to make it cheaper now must be purchased from the market, which will increase the demand for oil, which will raise the prices. So get ready for that, ladies and gentlemen. So they were able to do that to make a political... They did it for politics. I mean, there's no way around that. And here's the Politico article I got that from. All right, so this right here is a little dated, and so the information in this chart is not particularly relevant of today. But the reason why I wanted to include this in there is because this is government's own numbers here, and they're estimating in this article that energy prices at the time, and this was 2015, and they were looking back at 2002 through 2007. You're looking back at these different years. That 4.5% of food prices, or up to 7.5% of food prices, is energy costs. So when you look at all these energy taxes and you look at all the other stuff, strategic petroleum reserve, if I could speak right, you look at all those cost impacts are not just going to hit, home heating, and it's not just going to hit, gas tank prices and all that stuff. It's going to impact, the food price itself. And when it comes to increased costs at the pump, if diesel trends the same way that it always does when it comes to prices of oil and things like that, then you're also going to see an increase in transportation costs as well, which I don't have covered in here, but we know that's going to happen. All right, so let's look at another one. So we got winter wheat hammered by this. I mean, this was some Arctic ridiculousness. I don't know where in the world you living or where in the country or wherever it is you're at, but it was bad most everywhere. And so obviously that is going to make an impact on whatever can possibly grow, which isn't much in the wintertime. I guess we should be glad for that. But we do have a winter wheat crop, and they're saying this could cause some irreversible damage to the winter wheat. So that's going to be a pressure on the food supply here again for that. And this commodity weather group says 20% of the crop is susceptible to winter kill. 45% of the, including 45% of the hard winter wheat crop. 45%. That's a lot. I guess we'll see what the numbers end up being as time goes on, for what you could trust. But you rest assured, it didn't come out unscathed. That's for sure. And if this is even close to accurate, it got devastated. All right. So one more thing about the cold. This is a temporary problem here. With the extreme cold weather, shut down oil refineries and petrochemical plants in Texas, and I'm sure other locations as well. They obviously are probably already back open or will be back open, so this is only going to be a small short-term disruption. But every time you see a disruption, especially of 312,500 barrels per day, refinery being shut down, it may be a temporary bump in prices, but it's still going to be a bump, and we haven't even got into 2023 yet. But we will, so I hope everybody has a happy new year. So, I'll put in ready, set, grow, because we're going to need to be growing our own food. I know, get tired of all this craziness going on in the world, and I just want to get back out to my garden. There's not much gardening going on. I had some stuff in the greenhouse. I'll get to doing that. Maybe I can make a video on that. It'd be a little less depressing about these price increases and all this other stuff going on. But anyways, we got to talk about it because we can't lose our focus. We got to keep our eye on the ball no matter how tired of this craziness we get. So anyways, that is some of the stuff baked in for 2023. And I hope you have a happy and joyful, safe, fun New Year's. SHTF Garden out.